I saw how much fruit was being produced by this crabapple tree, and I didn't want it to go to waste, so I thought, why not make some jelly? So here's how to make crabapple freezer jelly, and also applesauce as a byproduct. So first I picked a few crabapples, actually about 6 pounds of them. And when selecting the crabapples for harvest, you want to be really picky. You gotta discard any crabapples that have insect damage or seem to be rotting. And unfortunately, in my case, most of the crabapples were damaged in some way. It seems like maybe I only harvested a sixth of the ones I looked at. But sometimes this damage can be cut out, but that's time consuming and finicky. And even damage that looks minor, like this, can signal insect damage inside. And that's just, you don't want to mess around with that. So really, only take the perfect crabapples for making jelly. So in all, to get all 6 pounds of crabapples, it took me about an hour and a half to pick them, although it was probably slowed down a bit because I was filming and being eaten alive by mosquitoes. Next is the most tedious part of the process, processing down the crabapples. I recommend getting set up, watching a show, or listening to a podcast because it takes a minute. So first you want to pull the stem off and what's left of the flour, that kind of green, brown fluff stuff at the bottom of the apple. It doesn't have to be perfect, just try and get the bulk of it off. And then take those destemmed apples and you want to thoroughly rinse them. I just kind of put them in a colander and ran some water through them and roughed them around a little bit. Then take those rinsed apples and cut them all in half. And this is what takes a long time if you've got as many crab apples as I do. And as you're going through, make sure to double check that each crab apple looks healthy on the inside. If it's brown or rotting, just chuck it. Unless it's really small, then you can cut out the soft or discolored spot. In all, I ended up with about 20 cups of processed crab apples, which I then promptly plopped into my stock pot because next we cook the crab apples. So you're going to place all your cut apples in a large stock pot and then add water up until it's just above the crab apples in the pot. Then bring that water to a boil. After it's been brought to a boil, you can just let it simmer until the crab apples become soft and start to separate from the skin. This can take, 15-20 minutes. Kind of keep stirring it every once in a while and keep an eye on them. Once they start to get soft, turn off the heat and you're going to extract the juice. So to extract the juice from the crab apples, you can do a couple of different things. You can kind of mash it up, and there's these jelly bags and a couple food. There's different ways to do it. I don't have any of that fancy equipment, so basically what I did is I took the softened crab apples with the skin falling off, and I ladled them into my colander, which I put over a bowl, and then I used my metal ladle to smash those down. So that the juice and some of the finer pulp went through the holes in the colander and collected in the bowl underneath it. Then I took that juicy pulp mix and put it through a fine mesh strainer over another bowl. And I let that sit for a little while and helped to go through a little bit with the spatula, but was more gentle with it. And then collecting in that second bowl was the actual juice that I would use. Now, this left over a lot of pulp in the colander, and I set that aside, planning to kind of run it through the process again to try and extract more juice from it, which I wasn't able to get more juice from it, but that's where the applesauce came from, so we'll get back to that. But basically, I went through all my apples and did the process I described, colander, then fine sieve, and I ended up with about 6 cups of the juice. Then with that pulp that was left over, I put that all back in the stock pot. I added a little bit of water and didn't boil it or really cook it or anything, but just warmed it up and stirred it around a whole bunch. And then I put it back through the colander, which was super easy because it was already mushed up. And then I was gonna put it through the fine mesh sieve, and I did, and it wasn't really much juice coming out, but if I kind of forced it through, I got this fine pulp, which is basically just applesauce. So I separated that out. I added sugar and brown sugar and white sugar and cinnamon to taste, and I left it a little bit more sour than most applesauce would normally be to keep it an interesting experience, and then just kind of set that aside. That was a bonus. I wasn't expecting to. Then after we have the juice, now it's time to actually make the jelly. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take the juice 1 cup at a time and put it back in the stock pot and start to heat it up. And for each cup of juice that you add, you wanna add about a 1/2 cup of sugar. I added a little bit less than a 1/2 cup of sugar on average. It's more what to taste. Different crab apples, some are sweeter, some are more sour. Some people want a sweeter, more sugary jelly. Some people want a little bit more of a tart jelly. But if you kind of keep it around the 1/2 cup of sugar-ish per cup of juice range, it'll probably be good. Then, after each cup of juice has been added and stirred in with the sugar, you're gonna let the mixture just kind of boil until it reaches what is called the jelly stage. Basically how you determine that is after it's been going for a while, this can take up to an hour. It didn't take a whole hour for me, so just keep an eye on it. After some water has been evaporated, you're gonna take a spoon and just take a little bit of the liquid and put it on a plate or something, and then put that in the fridge for just a few minutes, and it'll start to solidify. And then you want to take it out and drag your fingers through it. And as you can see, in my case, the streak left by my finger stayed there. The jelly didn't kind of rush back in to fill that space. So that means it's at the jelly phase. So you can turn the heat off and begin to ladle the what is now liquid jelly into your jars or whatever container you're putting in. And you want to do that while it's still warm because it's going to start to solidify. Now, if you're planning on freezing the jars, make sure you only fill them up to the freeze line if it's got one, or just not filling it up all the way. You're gonna wanna look it up or figure it out for your specific type of jar. And specifically for glass jars, you can't freeze them if they've got curved sides. So you really only, if you're gonna freeze glass, it's gotta be in a kind of straight-sided jar. And you don't wanna fill it all the way up because you wanna leave room for stuff to expand. But once you have the jars all filled up, set them aside and let them cool down to room temperature before you put the lids on them. Then after they've cooled down, you can put your lids on, gently tighten the metal ring, and then store them in the fridge or in the freezer. Alternatively, if you're just doing freezer jam, you don't have to use glass canning jars. You can use plastic jars, you can use other containers. There's really a lot of options there. I'm only storing my jelly and applesauce in the fridge and freezer, but it's possible to actually can the jelly and applesauce for a longer shelf life. But I'm not really making enough of it to justify messing around with all that, so if you want to do that, that's up to you. But the crab applesauce was unexpected. I wasn't planning to make it, but it's a nice byproduct, and I feel good about using more of the apple. It tastes a lot like regular homemade applesauce, a bit more sour and not quite as flavorful, but still really good. And I could have added more sugar to sweeten it up, but I wanted to keep it kind of a different experience from normal applesauce, keep it interesting. And you could, if you were doing this, add more sugar and cinnamon and really sweeten it up. The jelly set up really nicely and is pretty easy to get that set. It has a really great flavor, this kind of mild apple-y, with a really good mix of sweet and tart. It's not too sour, but it still has a little bit of a hit of sourness to it, and has a nice natural sweetness to it. So if you've made anything from crab apples, or you kind of follow along with what I've done, I really, really would love to hear about it down in the comments, or if you have any suggestions for what I should make next, or what I could do with crab apples. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button or subscribe. I would really, really appreciate that, but I will see you next time.